There we go. Just going to get rid of that. Okay. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about the COC competition and eSNAPs. We're going to talk about grants, executing them, doing amendments with them. We're going to talk about ZenGen, our project management database. We're going to talk about the different roles that grantees and subrecipients play, a little bit about drawdowns and ELOCs. We'll talk about HMIS, the Homeless Management Information System. We'll talk a little bit about APRs, annual performance reports. We're going to talk a little bit about RED and the renewal evaluation process. We'll touch a little bit on reallocation. We'll talk about point in time and housing inventory charts, SPMs or system performance measures. We'll talk a little bit about data quality, what monitoring looks like. We'll give you a sense of what a typical schedule or timeline looks like. And then talk a little bit just at the end about requirements for SNOFO projects. So we're going to start off with a poll because we'd love to know. We know a lot of the folks in the room. We might not know some of you. So we want to know, we're going to ask two questions. We want to know what type of COC projects do you work in? And then what role does your agency play in those projects? I think Lauren is going to launch that poll. There we go. Let's give everybody a minute to, less than a minute to maybe answer these questions quick. Let everybody click. Another 10 seconds, 20 seconds. You're going to answer both there. So there are two questions. And if you don't know, you can tell us you don't know, and that's fine too. All right. Oh, get any stragglers? Okay. We will end that poll. And share the results. So who's with us today? We've got a lot of PSH in the house today. Great. Got some rapid rehousing. Oh, we've got a little bit of everything. That's great. Some joint, great. Our joint RRH friends are here, youth navigators, others, and not sure. So that's fine too. So the folks who aren't sure, hopefully you'll be sure by the end of the training. And if not, you're gonna ask us and we can help out with that. And what role your agency is playing. So we've got a bunch of grant recipients, so people who are actually holding the grants themselves, subrecipients, folks who are working under a grantee. We've got housing providers, service providers, maybe a fiduciary in the house, and someone who's not sure, and again, totally fine. And again, maybe we can provide a little clarity there. All right. I'm going to stop sharing and get rid of that and keep going.
I'll take it. I'll trade you for my 20-pound one.
Okay. So we want to make sure that you leave today with lots and lots of resources. So in the slides are posted, and we will make sure that if they're not already, that they're in the chat. They're on our website, and there is tons and tons of stuff on our website. So I really encourage, especially new folks who haven't had a chance to look at it, to do that. Also, whenever we do a PowerPoint or share the slides with you, anything that is green and underlined is a live link. So you should be able to click right on that, and it takes you to the page that we're referring to, or the resource that we're talking about. So like I said, tons of webinars, lots and lots of information on the CT BOSS training page. We're going to be doing in January an introduction to CT BOSS. So again, for the newbies in the group, that would be really great for you to attend. We are also going to do a policies and administrative requirements, and that's coming up In February, we have the participant eligibility documentation webinar. We've got housing requirements, fiscal requirements coming up this spring. Today, you are at the grant management requirements. And then the DEMIS training catalog has fantastic resources. They've got assessment and acuity. They've got service planning, addressing substance abuse, and much more. So check out the DEMIS training catalog as well. Also, another set of really important resources to the Rapid Rehousing Operations Guide and the PSH Operations Guide. So Housing Innovations worked closely with DOH to pull together the Rapid Rehousing Operations Guide. And it's one place that has ODFC, BOSS, and DOH requirements and guidance all in one place. So if you haven't checked that out and you're a rapid rehousing provider, that's really an important resource. The PSH operations guide has a lot of good information. And then again, if you check out the training page, you can find out even more. And also on the training page, you can check out the trainings on these. So you can actually watch the trainings. So we would love for you to sign up for BOSS emails if you're not getting them, or if you know someone who should be getting them, please pass along this information to them. So we don't sign people up because we want you to choose which emails you would like to get. So when you click on that live link, that's green, ctboss.org, it will take you in the middle of the page. You can decide which list you would like to join. So if you want to know what's happening with the steering committee, as grantees, everybody should choose grantees, but we also have the new SNOFO providers there, general. We have YHDP separately because sometimes we message separately to these groups. But again, instead of sending us a note and saying, please sign me up, if you guys could sign yourself up, that helps us out because you get the emails that you're really looking for. And if you have new staff people, we're hoping that this can be part of your onboarding process, that you say right away, you need to be on the BOSS email list. So why does it matter? Why are we doing this? It matters for a lot of reasons, right? So the big reason is you want to have a project that really makes sense, that works, and a lot of this stuff helps you run a project that works really well. But also, if you don't meet the requirements that we're talking about, you could lose your funding, which is always our concern. We never want anyone to not be able to do the great work that you guys are doing, housing folks and providing great services. And that isn't possible unless you keep getting money. So we'll talk about this. Sometimes it sounds like we're being a pain in the neck, and we probably are a little bit, but it really is because we want you to stay in compliance and we don't want anyone ever to lose their money. So that's kind of important to keep in mind as we go through all of this. So what do we do? So Housing Innovations, you'll hear us say Housing Innovations, or HI. We staff the steering committee, and on behalf of the steering committee, we do lots of different things. So we do trainings like this. We create lots of tools and guidance and information to hopefully help you run your projects better. We help draft the policies. We evaluate projects. We monitor projects. We manage the website. We also prepare the application that goes to HUD each year. We're going to talk a little bit about that coming up. And we work with partners and other folks on HUD requirements, again, just to make sure that we can keep the money flowing, that folks are in compliance. In addition, we do other work with system performance measures and housing inventory and point in time count. Again, please reach out if you have any questions. So this is our email, and any question, anything you can think of, you can, well, at the end, I think, or we're happy in the chat to also give you our emails. You're welcome to reach out to Lauren directly or to me directly. But if you're not sure who to reach out to and you have a question, please ask. Please don't hesitate. Don't suffer in silence on something. We're here to help, and we really do want to help you. So, and if you have a question and you're not sure to ask us, and we'll point you in the direction. If it's not us, we'll send you to the right place, hopefully. So you hear us talk about the competition a lot. So you'll hear us sometimes say NOFO, Notice of Funding Opportunity. It used to be called the NOFA, Notice of Funding Availability. Well, you'll hear us call it the competition. We've got lots of names for this, but each year HUD does a nationwide competition where every COC across the country compete for money, and it's just under $3 billion. And in 2022, we were awarded over 50 million. And then there was a separate competition, and we were awarded over 18 million over 3 years. So every year, every COC is required to do a consolidated application, which describes information all about the specific COC. And then we're required to rank and prioritize all the projects within the COC. And we submit both the consolidated application and then the prioritized list going from highest score to lowest score to HUD. So those two pieces go to HUD every year. And then HUD reviews both of those pieces. And then in addition, you'll hear us talk about bonus projects. And bonus projects are in addition to the projects that are already the renewals that already exist. And those are funded depending on how well the COC scores on our application. So you'll hear us talk about points and trying to score as high points as we can, because points equals money to the COC, which equals new projects, new funding to try to work towards our goal of ending homelessness. So I told you the ending, what we submit to HUD, we get there by submitting an RFP, so a request for proposals for new projects. Probably it will be late winter this year, maybe early spring. And then agencies are able to submit new project applications to us. Those go to a scoring committee. It's decided which projects are going to be put forth. The steering committee is also involved in that. And that's how we decide what are the new projects going to look like. HUD usually releases we're going to keep saying NOFO in the summer. Sometimes it's as late as the fall, but usually in the summer. And that's when you'll start getting information about renewal projects and what's required. We'll do a webinar for projects for all renewals and to let folks know what's going on. We don't know. So as of right now, we don't know what we've been funded for in the current competition. They usually let us know late in the winter. So I've talked a lot. Are there any questions?
I don't see anything in the chat, Liz.
All right, good. I'll keep going. So eSnaps, something else you hear us talking about a lot too. So this is how folks submit applications to HUD. So this is their grant, this is HUD's grant application system. So if you are submitting an application, this is the only way to do it. So you must be in eSnaps. So you probably hear us say, please make sure you have access to eSnaps. Please make sure you have multiple people. BOSS requires that you have 2 eSnaps users. Every year we have an issue with this because then it makes sense. We understand sometimes small agencies and one person is the person in charge, but unfortunately, sometimes that person goes to the hospital, has an issue, is on vacation, and then you're left without being able to submit an eSnaps. We just really need 2 users. Remember, if your application doesn't go into eSnaps, it has no chance of being funded. It's the only way it can get funded by HUD is for you to submit that. So it's really important that folks know how to do it, have 2 people from their agency, and then also importantly that that their second person really knows how to use the system. So you're not just saying, oh yeah, I have a second person. The second person really should be trained as well. So that is eSnaps. Anything else?
So yeah, just
ahead,
real quick, one thing that we suggest is that, because oftentimes, we always have 2 users, but then when push comes to shove and the primary person isn't available, the second person has no idea anything about the system, has no idea how to use the system. So one thing we really encourage you to do, if you haven't done this already, is in the upcoming competition, if you're the primary person, make sure that when you're doing the application, you're actually sitting down with the second person and doing it with them. So if they have to jump in at any point on your behalf because you're no longer available, they really know how to use the system.
Yeah, good point. Good point. And like we said, we stress this so much because this is how your application goes in. And I don't want to say we can't do it for you. We actually sometimes can help. We can get in to edit. But you ultimately need to be the one in eSnaps to get this funding. And that's why we really, really need you to have 2 people. So if they are getting started in eSnaps, this is what the page looks like. And then we have the navigational guide, the link there, really helpful. If you click on that, if you have 2 screens or old school, you print it out and you want to look at paper and have it in front of you, that's really helpful. Step by step, it will tell you how to do this. Literally every click, every step is described in the navigational guide. So I encourage folks, especially new folks, to check it out. And again, I like Lauren's suggestion that you sit down with your second person, and you both know how to do it. So this just takes us through a little bit the awards and HUD grant agreement execution. So you see that the first thing is that you get a notification of an award. So you've been awarded. As I mentioned before, CT Boss decides which projects are included in the application to HUD. HUD determines which projects are funded. Then you're going to find out what happens. After you find out and you get your notification, now what do I do? So now you have to go into eSnaps and you need to do what they call issues and conditions, which means you need to provide match information, budget details, an environmental review, and a code of conduct that you need to confirm. You're either confirming this information or providing this information, depending on the status of this. And until this is done in eSnaps, you cannot execute your grant. So if you're waiting, it's what's going on? Why can't I execute my grant? You must do this first. And then once HUD is happy and you've done what you were supposed to do in eSnaps, you're able to execute your grant. And the grant is between the grantee or we're going to call it the recipient or the grantee and HUD. And then the contract between the recipient and subrecipient happens after that. So you may be a subrecipient of DMIS or of DOH, and that's going to happen after DMIS or DOH or whoever the grant recipient is has executed the contract with HUD. I'll stop for a second.
I just want to say that on this slide, just so everybody's super clear, Liz said this before, but we are currently awaiting step number 1 for the 2023 competition, right? So HUD has not yet announced the awards. So once they announce the awards, we'll let you guys know, and then you'll proceed on to step number 2 and step number 3.
Perfect. All right, you'll also hear us talk a lot about Zengen, and there's a lot of information here, so I'm not going to read every single word that's here, but Zengen's really important because this is our database. And Zengen is used by all of you to get documents to us. What's important to remember is Zengen is all CT Boss. So when you're giving information and providing data to us through Zengen, you're not giving HUD any information. It doesn't go directly to HUD. One day I wish we could make a magic database where you only put information in once and it goes to everyone that's needed, but that's not this. So just important that you have multiple requirements. We talked about eSnaps, which is part of HUD. Now we're talking about Zengen, which is part of CT Boss. Every BOSS project is associated with one primary contact, has one primary contact profile, and then that has primary, secondary, and third contact options within it. Each contact profile has to be associated, it can be associated with more than just one project. And every primary user must list at least one other contact plus the executive director, and then there's an option to add a third contact. So it's a lot of words and once you go in, I think it's pretty clear how to do this. But again, it's just important that this is updated, that you have the information in there, because again, we need to, and kind of the other people who are in there, it's helpful if those are people that we really can contact as needed. Everyone in the agency who needs access does need to get the primary user's login information. And you're going to use the contact profile to submit documents. Zengen contacts are automatically added as additional red users. So once you update it in Zengen, it's updated in red. And then a reminder that there is scoring on this for the renewal evaluation. So there is a penalty if this is not done. And again, it's just very, very important that we know who to reach. So please, please go in, update. If you have no idea what's going on, you're welcome to reach out to us. Also, Shannon on our team manages this, so she's a good contact. But check out the ZenGen web page, and hopefully that will answer any questions you might have. But super important, if you can keep your contacts up to date, that's really helpful for us. Okay, so we're going to talk about grant amendments. So sometimes you have a grant, you've been awarded, you've gone through the steps we've all talked about, and you say, ooh, something has to change. So lots of different things can change or might need to change. So if it's what we call a significant change, and I'll talk about those in a second, you have to have the HUD field office and CAN approval for these. So both of those things need to happen. So these are changes. So maybe the recipient's going to change. The project site might change. So you are doing a capital project and you thought it was at 100 Main Street, got moved, and now it's at 500 Main Street. You need to do grant amendment for something like that. If you're moving more than 10% of a budget line item to another budget line item, you're moving from rental assistance to services, from services to operations, depending on what your project looks like. If it's more than 10%, that's a significant change. If you're changing who you are serving, so it used to be a project you submitted for survivors of domestic violence, and now that's not your population any longer. That's a significant change. If you're looking to reduce the number of units, that's also a big change. And you need to remember that you need CAN approval prior to going to HUD. So the order is to go to the CAN first, and once the CAN approves it, then you go to HUD. There are also things called minor changes, and these don't require HUD approval. So this would be if you're moving less than 10% from one budget line item to another. HUD approval is not required, but HUD must be notified. Budget changes must be reflected in locks. So we'll talk about locks a little bit later, how you get your money down. And then if there's a subrecipient change, that's a minor change. And also CT Boss, we need to know about all of the changes. I'll pause for a second. Any grant amendment questions?
Just real quick, I wanted to say under the significant changes here, the permanent reduction in the number of units, typically that is not a change that HUD is going to approve. So you're welcome to try, but it is not in our experience one that they are, unless you are reducing the amount of money that you are getting. They're probably not going to approve a request to reduce the amount of people that you're serving or the amount of units that you are supporting.
Exactly. Anything else? All right. So Lauren is gonna launch another poll, and this poll is going to be true or false. So for each of these, you are going to have the chance to tell us if you think this is true or false. Give everybody another 10, 20 seconds. I see people answering. I know we have 5 of them to do. How are we doing?
We've got about 66% of folks have responded.
I think that's great. So I'm going to end it so we can chat about this. All right, so our first one is registering eSnaps automatically creates your user account in ZenGen. Oh, I wish it were true, but it is not true. So as we were discussing before, totally separate systems. eSnaps is HUD system that doesn't talk to ZenGen. One day I hope it will. So that is not true. This one, again, wish it were true. COC grants must submit an application to renew every other year. I like your thinking. We wish that were true. And I may not have made it as clear as I should have. Every year, every single year, you got to submit a renewal application. So again, like your thinking, that's aspirational. We wish it were true too, but so every year, and don't worry, we will remind you. So again, that's why it's so important that you are on CT Boss emails if other staff people need to be, and you will get more emails than you probably would like to, and that we would like to have to send to remind you about all the NOFO stuff. So it's every year you're going to renew your project. Issues and conditions on a COC award can be resolved in ZenGen. No. So again, ZenGen is COC as the boss system, and issues and conditions have to be resolved in eSnaps. So eSnaps is the HUD system, and in order to get your grant and to resolve issues and conditions, you are going to do that in eSnaps. CAN approval is required for all grant amendments. So it is not required it is required for a significant change. It is not required for a minor change. Does that make sense to folks? Okay. Grant agreement amendments, budget changes, and subrecipient changes must be reported to boss. Yes, everybody got that. Great. Or almost everybody got that. Yes, please tell us what's happening because we want to know. Anything else? Any questions? Clarifications? Nope. Okay. We will move on. So we're going to talk a little bit about different partner roles. So we've been throwing around the term grant recipient. You'll hear us say grant recipient. You'll hear us say grantees. And these folks are the entities that are responsible for doing a lot of different tasks. We'll talk about that in a minute. Grant recipients can be government or not-for-profit. If it's a rapid rehousing project, for the most part, generally it's DOH. There are still a few rapid rehousing projects where it is a not-for-profit who's the actual grantee or grant recipient. And for a PSH project, generally it is DEMIS, but again, there are some not-for-profits that are also the grantees. And DEMIS has about 60 grants where they're the grantee, and DOH has numerous grants as well, not as many as DEMIS. So grantees are in charge of, we talked a little bit about this, executing the grant and getting the money directly from HUD. They are in charge of the performance, spending, compliance, making sure the project's doing what it's supposed to be doing, monitoring the project. They are also supposed to be supporting and managing the subrecipients. We'll talk about subrecipients in a second. They are in charge of drawing down the funds in the ELOC system. They're also in charge of submitting the APR, which is the annual progress report. They are also in charge of doing anything that has to do with a grant agreement amendment. So we talked a little bit about what the amendments are. It would be the grantee who's in charge of those. And then they are in charge either themselves, or they can assign out the project application, the technical submission, all the renewal evaluation information, HMIS, data getting into HMIS, etc. So that is a grant. That is our grant recipient, or you'll hear us say grantees. So subrecipients and service providers. So subrecipients, not-for-profit subrecipients get the money and report to the recipient or grantee They may provide the services to tenants. They might help with housing location. They might be in charge of entering into HMIS. It depends on the relationship between the recipient and the subrecipient. And then there may be a variety of other duties they do. Not-for-profit service providers receive non-COC funding from DEMIS, and they provide services to PSH tenants. They, again, may help with housing location. They might enter into HMIS and do other duties that are agreed upon between the recipient and the subrecipient. Housing providers, so nonprofit housing providers administer the rental assistance. So what does that mean? That means they do income determinations, they do rent calculations, they do HQS, the housing quality standards inspection, rent reasonableness, lease execution. They might help with housing location. The LMHAs offer a lot of really, really important services. So if you don't know your LMHA, who may be providing all of the rental assistance and tasks I just noted before, please reach out and make sure you know your LMHA if you don't know them. They have a lot of, they have mobile crisis and a lot of other services that are really important. So they're either state funded, they're operated by DEMIS, some of them are operated by not-for-profits. And in PSH projects, sometimes the LMHA is the primary service provider or housing provider. Yeah. Anything else? Any questions? I haven't stopped for. Nope. Okay. Another partner, as we talk about the fiduciaries. So these are the folks that receive COC funding from the recipient and report back to the recipient. So they are in charge of reviewing and processing rent payments. They issue rent payments to the landlords. And for rapid rehousing, it is either ACT or CCADV. And DEMIS plays this fiduciary role for almost all of the PSH projects. We just wanted to give you a visual. So this is just one example of what a project might look like. So again, remember HUD, that's our funder, the grantee or the recipient, or the, in this example is DOH. And then the subrecipient fiduciary is ACT or CCADV. So remember, they're going to do all the rental piece. And all those tasks we talked about before. There might be a subrecipient provider for Hartford, and then maybe they also have units in New Haven, and so there's a service provider in New Haven. So this is one example. Not all projects look like this, but a lot of projects do. So just wanted to give you a visual on this. And again, we talked about the tasks and roles may vary depending on the project, on the recipient and the subrecipient, and what agreement has been made with all of them. And now we're going to look at a PSH, just one example. But again, HUD is our funder. The money goes to DEMIS, who's the grantee. And in this case, we have a housing provider, which is the LMHA. We talked a little bit about that. And then we have a subrecipient. That's a nonprofit service provider. And we might have several, right? So we may have one in Hartford and New Haven and Willimantic, depending on what the project looks like and how many units there are. So I'll pause again. Questions, comments? No? All right, I'm going to pass it off to Lauren.
Hey, everybody. I just want to say, don't hesitate to ask questions, right? Even if you feel like, you know, your question seems super basic and you should know it, that's the point of today's session. So there's no wrong question, right? So if you've got any questions, please, please, please ask your questions. You can unmute yourself to ask a question, or you can put it in chat, and Liz will be monitoring the chat while I'm talking. So you've heard Liz refer a couple times to LOCKSS or eLOCKSS, right? So eLOCKSS is the web-based system that HUD uses in order to provide grants with their money. And so this is only going to be relevant to your agency if you are a recipient, a direct recipient of HUD funds. So if your agency has a grant agreement directly with HUD, you will be responsible for drawing down your money in ELOCs. If your agency is a subrecipient, meaning that you get your money not directly from HUD, but rather usually from either DEMIS or DOH, or in some cases from another nonprofit, then you don't have to worry about ELOCs. You can tune out for the next couple of minutes. So, you know, ELOCs it's HUD system, so it's a little antiquated and not super user friendly. It's pretty complicated. So there's a lot of hoops that you have to jump through, unfortunately, in order to get ELOCs access and in order to maintain ELOCs access. And so the two things that are most important to remember about ELOCs is that you have got to draw down at least quarterly. We'll talk more about monitoring later and what triggers monitoring, but not drawing down quarterly is one of those things that can trigger HUD to come out and monitor you. And then more importantly, if you don't access the system at least every 90 days, you will get locked out of the system. So if your agency is a recipient of HUD funds and you need to use ELOCs to get access to your money, you really want to put some sort of alert, some sort of tickler in your calendar to remind you to log into that system every 90 days, because it is quite a pain to restore your access if you should get locked out of ELOCs. The other thing that's really important to remember, stay on that side, thanks Liz. The other thing that's really important to remember is that you've got to expend all of the money in your grant and draw it down no later than 90 days after your grant end date, right? So if your grant ends November 30th, you have 90 days to draw down all your money. Once that 90 days elapses, you will no longer have access to that money. And there really is nothing that we can do about it and nothing that you can do about it. That is just kind of the hard and fast HUD rules. So next slide. So here we have put a link to all of the HUD information. They call it their quick reference guide, but I don't know if any of you have seen it. It's pretty complicated, so quick reference guide might be a little bit of a misnomer, but all of the information is there. And I'm sorry that it's so complicated. Like I said, it's a HUD system. There's nothing we can do about it, but it really is worth your time to understand how ELOCs works and make sure that you are doing everything correctly. And that you have multiple people who have access into the system. You definitely want to make sure that as part of your process, when a staff person who is an ELOCs user leaves your agency or a new person comes on that needs to be an ELOCs user, that it's a standard part of your hiring practices so that you're updating that user information in ELOCs, because you do not want to be in a situation where you're at day 89 and you've not drawn down your money and the person who can draw down your money is no longer at your agency, because there is going to be nothing that you can do. You are not going to get access quickly enough and you are going to lose that money. So again, super important, make sure you log in every 90 days. Once you get locked out, I don't know if anyone on the webinar today has had the joy of having their agency have no authorized ELOCs users. There are quite a lot of hoops and it takes a while for HUD to restore your access. So you really want to avoid being in that situation. And again, you want to make sure that you are doing your drawdowns within 90 days of your grant end date. Please don't wait till day 89 because if something goes awry, you are going to run out of time and lose access to that money. And once you lose access to that money, that's it. It's gone. It's gone permanently. And again, there's nothing we can do about it, and there's going to be nothing you can do about it either. So super important, maintain access, do the drawdowns within 90 days. Next slide. All right, so HMIS, or the Homeless Management Information System. So this is the statewide database where all of the information about all of the projects that have beds designated to serve folks experiencing homelessness, or folks who were experiencing homelessness at the time they entered a project, as well as all of the people that are getting help from those projects, live in our HMIS system. This is a HUD requirement. So every single project that is funded by the COC is required to enter information about the people that you are serving into HMIS. And in Connecticut, we use a product called Caseworthy. So if you, Caseworthy and HMIS are sort of used interchangeably in Connecticut. So if your agency is a domestic violence service provider, you are statutorily prohibited from entering information into HMIS. And so in that case, you are required instead to enter that information into what's called a comparable database. And in Connecticut, that comparable database is managed by CCADV, the Connecticut Coalition Against Domestic Violence. So we're going to talk a lot over the next few slides about all of the different ways in which we use the information in HMIS and how important it is that the information in HMIS is accurate. So our coordinated access networks, our CANs, use that information to help people, to assess what people need and to help people get access to the programs that they need. We use that information when we report to HUD about all of the great outcomes that our system is achieving. So we call those things systems performance measures. We're going to talk more about that in a moment. We also in Connecticut use HMIS for our point in time count and our housing inventory chart. We'll talk about those things in a minute. And then we use them for our annual performance reports, which is how you are reporting to HUD what you are doing with the money that they give to you, as well as for renewal evaluation. So CT Boss uses the information that you put into HMIS to evaluate your projects every year and to determine whether or not your project will continue to be funded. So, so this HMIS information is used in many different ways and is important. In Connecticut, the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness, or CCEH, is our HMIS lead for CT Boss, and their contact information for their data team is here. And basically, as the HMIS lead, they are responsible for a bunch of different stuff, right? Making sure that our HMIS is meeting all of the HUD requirements, making sure that it is easy for you all to use, making sure that we're making strategic decisions about any new functions or new reports that are needed out of HMIS. So those decisions get made by the HMIS Steering Committee, and CCEH is the leader. They staff the HMIS Steering Committee. So any kind of big picture concerns about HMIS, those should go to CCEH. And then we also have in Connecticut Nutmeg. So Nutmeg are sort of the techies, right? They're the people that work with the programmers at Caseworthy to fix any bugs in HMIS. They're the people that provide technical support to the users of HMIS. So they staff the HMIS help desk. So if you have a very specific question about HMIS, like, I don't know what information I'm supposed to put in this field, or my APR is, producing a result that I think is wrong, right? Those kinds of questions should go to the Nutmeg team, and the help desk at Nutmeg. The email is here on this slide. The other link that's here is the link to the learning management system for HMIS, which is the way that all HMIS users get trained. So before you can get access into HMIS, you need to take certain trainings. The learning management system is new and hopefully helpful in making sure that all of your staff can get trained quickly in order to get access into HMIS. And again, HMIS training for anyone on your team who's going to need to enter data into HMIS, that should be a regular part of your onboarding process. So when you're hiring a new person, make sure that you are quickly getting them to this link and signed up for whatever trainings they need in order to authorize them as a user in HMIS. I'm going to pause for a minute and see if we have any questions.
Not seeing anything in the chat.
All right, so annual performance reports, or the APR. So every year, every project that receives COC funding is required to submit an APR. And this is the way that you tell HUD how, what you did with the money that they gave you. So it's your annual report to your funder. So it gets submitted in what's called SAGE. There's a link to SAGE here on the slide, and SAGE is, again, a HUD data system. And you've got to upload data out of HMIS and into SAGE, and you've got to do that within 90 days of your grant agreement period ending. So 90 days, and when they say 90 days, they mean 90 days quite literally. They don't mean 3 months. They mean 90 days. So be mindful that it's not necessarily the last day of the month when your APR is due. It's exactly 90 days from your contract end date. And SAGE will tell you what the due date is. You can see in SAGE what the due date of your APR is. So if you don't submit your APR, HUD can actually shut down your access to draw down in ELOCs on your current grant. So you want to make sure that you've submitted that APR within 90 days, and you want to make sure that HUD has accepted your APR. Sometimes they reject an APR. So you want to log back into SAGE and make sure that your APR has been accepted by HUD. I see Kathy has her hand up. Hi, Kathy.
So if you're a sub-recipient of DOH, they do the APR submission, right?
Thank you, Kathy. Yes, so that's an excellent point. Thank you for that important question, Kathy. So if you are a sub-recipient, right, so only the recipients do the, actually submit the APR. Now, as a sub-recipient, you're probably entering data into HMIS, and it's important that the data that you enter into HMIS is accurate. So even as a sub-recipient, you should be periodically running the APR. If you're responsible for HMIS, you should be periodically running the APR to make sure, and we'll look at that at the next slide, to make sure that the data are correct. But the recipient is the organization that will actually do the upload and submit it into SAGE. So they are technically responsible, but the subrecipients often play an important role in making sure that those data are there and correct. And then I just said this, so the data that you're submitting in the APR come from either the HMIS, or if you're a victim service provider, the comparable database, and they're used both by HUD to make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing with the money that they're giving to you, and we're also using data to evaluate your project. CT Boss is also using those data to evaluate your project, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. So linked on this slide is 2 things. It's the SAGE user manual, as well as a template that shows you all of the APR data tables, so you can see exactly what information is in the APR. It's a much easier way of seeing it than in a CSV file, which is very hard for a human being to read. So, okay. Next slide,
we have a question. Where do we upload APR for subrecipient as DV programs do not have access to HMIS?
So for victim service provider agencies, right, the data get extracted from your comparable database, right, but they still get uploaded into SAGE. So they get extracted from a different system, but so you basically take a CSV file, and then that CSV file gets uploaded still into SAGE. So it's all de-identified information that you're uploading into SAGE. Good question, Benji. All right, next slide, Liz. So start early, right? We never want you to wait. Same like we were talking about with lax. Don't wait till day 89 to check your APR. We really recommend that you, look at your APR data at least quarterly, right? So that you're not at the end of the year scrambling to do a whole bunch of data cleanup, right? You don't want to be at the end of the year and see, oh crap, we're supposed to be serving 50 households at a point in time, and our APR shows that we're only serving 5, right? So you want to be doing that data cleanup all throughout the year. So you're going to run your APR. You're going to check your APR for data quality. So I just gave one example, right? Like you're not, you want to make sure that you're serving the number of people that you said you were going to serve. You want to make sure if you're a PSH program, right? PSH programs, everyone in that program should be disabled by definition. They're not eligible if they're not disabled. So you want to make sure that your APR shows that all of your people are disabled, right? All of the programs are required to serve people who meet the HUD definition of homelessness. So you want to make sure that your APR shows that you're serving people who were in fact homeless when they entered your program. And then you want to make those data corrections, obviously, before you submit, and then either whether it's you if you're the recipient of the grant, or if you're not the recipient, if you're a subrecipient, DOH or DMIS usually would submit those data in Sage, upload that CSV file into Sage within 90 days of the grant end date. And linked on this slide are a bunch of additional resources here. You've got a HUD guide, a link to the HUD guide and tools from HUD. And then you've got some information from Nutmeg on how to generate your CSV file out of Caseworthy for upload to Sage. If you are a DV service provider, reach out to CCADV if you are not sure how to do that. All right, so we're going to do a quick poll. I think Liz is going to launch the poll for us. So the question is, what happens if an APR is not submitted on time? And you've got multiple options, and you can choose all of the options that apply. Oh, I think you're only going to be able to choose one option. That's okay. Just choose one of the correct options. There are 2 correct options, but I think the way that this is set up, you're only going to be able to choose one of them.
Sorry.
It's okay. No big deal.
My poll setting. Oops.
I didn't realize until just now either. So no big deal.
Either.
All right, we've got about 52% of folks participating. Give you another couple minutes. All right, I'm gonna end the poll and share the results. So, all right, so there are 2 correct answers here, even though you were only able to select one. So what happens if an APR is not submitted? The grantee will be unable to get future contracts with HUD, probably not. That is not certainly automatically a consequence of not submitting your APR on time. You will have to explain it though. If you are applying for money for HUD and you've not submitted your APR on time, you will have to explain why and what you did to correct that problem. All participants will have their leases terminated. Thankfully, no, HUD is not that mean. Your participants will continue to be able to get, continue to be able to be in their apartments, even though you've not submitted the APR. However, you are not going to be able to draw down your funds potentially on your current grant, right? So you could have some challenges if you've got cash flow issues continuing to pay rent on those leases. So you want to make sure, again, that you are submitting your APR on time. Grantee must obtain a letter from the congressperson demonstrating support for continued funding. No, that's not something that you have to do. The last one is correct. So chances of being selected for HUD monitoring increase. If you don't submit your APR on time, you definitely increase the likelihood that HUD is going to select you for monitoring. So the correct answer is the last bullet, HUD monitoring, and the third bullet, that you're not going to be able to draw down funds on your current contract. All right, I'm going to stop sharing and go on to the next slide. All right, so every year, CT BOSS, like every other COC around the country, is required by HUD to evaluate all of the projects that we fund. And then we use this evaluation, as Liz said earlier, to determine the order in which projects are ranked when we submit the application to funding to HUD. So the project ranked number 1 has the very, very, very good chance of getting funded, and the project ranked all the way at the bottom probably is not going to get funded, right? So renewal evaluation impacts the likelihood that you are you're gonna be able to continue to get your grant funded. So, and every year the CT BOSS steering committee, which is the governance body for CT BOSS, they're the folks that make all the decisions. We are just the staff. We don't make the decisions. The steering committee makes the decisions. They establish the criteria for renewal evaluation. So those are basically the standards that we use to evaluate your projects. And we look at a number of different things. Every year we look at consumer surveys. So every person who is getting help from your project has the opportunity at least once a year to fill out a survey to tell you and to tell us how they think that project is doing. And you are evaluated on the response rate, the number of people that you get to complete that survey. You get full points at 35%, so you don't need to get every person to do it. We also want to make sure, there's not enough resources. I don't have to tell you all this. In order to meet the need. And so we want to make sure that every dollar that we gets spent to help somebody that's experiencing homelessness. So part of what we evaluate is whether or not you're spending all of your money or whether or not you're leaving money on the table. When you leave money on the table, we send that money back to HUD, right? We're no longer able to use that money to help people experiencing homelessness in Connecticut, and we don't want that to happen. So that's something that we evaluate. We also evaluate whether or not your project is full, right? So again, there's not enough resources. So we want to make sure that the resources that we have are fully utilized. So if your project is supposed to serve 20 households at a point in time and you're only serving 10, you're going to lose points on the renewal evaluation. And then we also look at certain performance outcomes, right? So we look at, for example, whether or not you're successful at helping people to increase their income, right? Either through employment or through benefits like Social Security. And then we look at whether or not you're successful at getting people non-cash benefits. So things like medical insurance and childcare and food stamps, right? We look at whether or not you are helping people to either stay in permanent housing or to exit your project to permanent housing. And then again, Liz mentioned this earlier, we want to make sure, it's so important that your Zengen contacts are current. And so if you do not, we ask you to update those contacts quarterly, and we can see when you've last updated them. So make sure you get in there and update your Zengen contacts, because there is a scoring penalty in the renewal evaluation if you do not do that. And then also, you've got to submit your surveys on time. If you don't submit your surveys on time, there'll be a scoring penalty for that as well. Kathy has her hand up. Hey, Kathy.
Yeah, could you clarify about submitting consumer surveys? There seem to be
Sure.
different methods of doing that I feel a little confused about.
Sure. So So if you are and all of this, there's on the next slide, I think we're going to link to the training that we did on this. So all of the details about this are in a webinar that's posted on the website. But there are a couple different ways that you can submit consumer surveys, right? So first of all, there's 2 different kinds of consumer surveys, and you can opt to use either kind, right? So CT Boss has a consumer survey instrument, and then Demas has their own consumer survey instrument. I think we just had something happen with the slides, Liz, on the share. There we go. So I'll start with the CT Boss consumer surveys. So if you are opting to use the CT Boss survey instrument, right, you can give your participants links into SurveyMonkey, and they can complete a survey right in SurveyMonkey, and there's nothing that you have to do, right? You can also, because not everyone, we get it, not everyone maybe even be literate in your programs, let alone computer literate, right? So you may be giving people a paper version of the survey, and maybe even having a staff person help them to fill it out because they can't read well enough to do it without your help. So if you're opting for that method, and you can use a mix of all these different methods, right? You have 2 choices. Either someone on your team can then go in and use that SurveyMonkey link and enter the data, or you can upload the form. You can upload a copy of the paper survey into Zengen, and our team will do the data entry, right? So those are your options for CT Boss surveys, and Liz will jump in if I get anything wrong. And then on the Demas surveys, so new this year, right? So some providers are Demas funded, and so they have to do an annual survey for Demas. So we don't want people to have to do 2 different kinds of surveys. So if you're a Demas project that participates in that Demas survey process, you can we will use the surveys that you have submitted to Demas, and we will get those, this is new this year, we will get those from Demas. So the deadline for consumer survey entry is December 6th. So after December 6th, we will get whatever surveys you have provided to Demas in the past year, and we will use those to evaluate your projects. There's nothing that you need to do. And you can go in those links, those Demas links are live now. So you can be collecting more surveys now up until the 6th. And again, after the 6th, we will go and get that data from Demas. All right. So if you do not do well on your renewal evaluation, right? Every year the steering committee decides that any project that scores below a certain number, 70, 60, whatever it is that year, that those projects are considered to be in corrective action. You will be required to submit a corrective action plan, and new this year, those corrective action plans will be submitted in the renewal evaluation database, or RED, which we're going to talk about on the next slide. And again, poor scores on renewal evaluation, not 1 year, right? But if there's a pattern of doing poorly on your renewal evaluation, you could risk losing your COC funding. So, all right. So the renewal evaluation database. So this is, I think, the 3rd year that we're using the renewal evaluation database. It's a web-based system where you can log into the system. You can see what your score is. The system went live effective November 1st. You can see your score. You can request, not yet, but when we get there, if you think that your final score is wrong, you can request a score change. And if you are required to, because you've scored below the threshold set by the steering committee, you will also be able to submit a corrective action plan. Those last 2 things are not steps that we've gotten to so yet this year. And what RED does is it looks at the data that are either in HMIS or the data that you upload into RED if you're a victim service provider from the comparable database. And then it compares your performance based on those data against the standards that are established by the steering committee, and it calculates your score. So the way that you get access into RED is by being listed as a contact in Zengen. So if you need access to RED and you don't have access to RED, go into Zengen and update your contacts in Zengen, and then once a day at night, that will get rolled over into RED, and the next day you should have access in RED. So as I said, we went through all of these details in much more detail in a webinar that we did just on renewal evaluation, and that document is linked here, as well as the instructions for our 2024 renewal evaluation process. I did just want to say one thing really quickly. So you may see that in RED, your results are different than what you would expect based upon your APR. And the reason for that usually is going to be because there's a data quality problem in HMIS that doesn't get picked up by the APR, right? So HUD has specific programming specs for the APR, and those programming specs don't necessarily pick up every kind of data quality problem. So, if you've got a data quality problem, if you've got a result in RED that is different than what you would expect based upon your APR, the first thing that you're going to do is try to, and we'll look at a tool for this in a moment, fix the data quality. If the data quality fix doesn't work and you still have an unexpected result in RED, then you can click on in RED. There's a link on the support page for the COC Renewal Evaluation Data Cleanup Help Desk. Click on that, and Nutmeg will help figure out what's going on, whether or not it's a bug in RED. But for the most part, right now, almost all of the problems that we're seeing are data quality problems that need to be fixed by you guys in HMIS and not bugs in RED. All right, so next slide. So reallocation. So reallocation is a fancy HUD term, and basically what it means is that every year during the annual COC competition, COCs can decide to reduce the amount of money that a project is getting or completely eliminate that project, and then take that money that before was being used by that project and use that money for a new project, right? So we talked about this earlier, right? If your grant is consistently underspending and there isn't a good reason why you're underspending, you could be at risk for having some of your funding reallocated. Now, we know that there are many good reasons why people cannot always fully spend. And then also, if you are consistently performing poorly, that's another reason why your grant could be reallocated. You can also decide, right, that, you know what, this project is just not a good fit for my agency anymore. We've changed our mission. This is no longer aligned with our mission. Or, you know, maybe it is a good fit, but you don't want to, you can't use all your, you can't use all your money every year, and you want to give back some of that money so that it can be used for other new projects. So you can decide that you want to voluntarily reallocate some or all of your funding. We want to make sure that all of the money gets used to help homeless people experiencing homelessness in Connecticut. So please, if you're deciding that, you know what, you don't want to do this anymore, maybe it's more trouble than it's worth for your organization, right? Some of these grants are very small and the number of requirements is quite big. So if you're in that boat, please talk to us, and before you talk to HUD, and we will help to make sure that if you're going to give back some or all of your money, that money stays in Connecticut to help people experiencing homelessness in Connecticut. All right, housing inventory chart and point in time count. So these are requirements every year. Every project is required to participate. Every COC funded project is required to participate. The point in time count is basically a count on a single day at the end of January. The date for this year is January 23rd, 2024. We count all of the people who are experiencing sheltered homelessness, so they're living in an emergency shelter or transitional housing or a safe haven, and people who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness, so people living on the streets in their cars in an abandoned building, et cetera. And we report that information to HUD. We are also required to report information about all the programs that serve those folks, and that's called the housing inventory chart. So just a few quick things. We want to make sure that everyone, that is going to be responsible for helping to report this data at your agency attend at least 1-2 people from each agency should be sure that you are attending the HIC and PIT trainings. There was a training already that happened. There'll be another one coming up before the count date. We really need you to report this data on time. We have a deadline for reporting the data to HUD. There was a deadline that passed last week. It was November 9th to report changes for all programs except for rapid rehousing programs, to report changes in your bed inventory. And then the next data reporting deadline that's coming up to report, make sure that your census and your program is accurate and we have a correct count of the people that your program is helping. That deadline is going to be January 30th, so about a week after the date of the count. We really need the data to be accurate, so we are reporting the correct number to HUD. And again, as with all the data systems, please make sure that more than one person in your agency has access to the PIT database. And then here, linked on this slide is the website, which is now at a different link. It's managed by Nutmeg now, not ACT. So this is the link that we will be using this year. All right, quickly, we're running out of time, so I'm going to move quickly through the next set of slides. So these are our systems performance measures. So these are the things that we report to HUD that tells them how well we're doing together collectively as a system at helping to end homelessness in Connecticut. I won't go through all of them, but we use your HMIS data to report these things to HUD. And it's things like how long is someone homeless, whether or not we're helping to get them income, whether or not we're preventing them from returning to the system once we've helped them to get permanent housing, how many people are becoming homeless for the first time. So are we successful at preventing homelessness? And then the number of people in our point in time count, as well as the number of people who experience homeless throughout the course of an entire year. Those are the things that make up our system's performance metrics. Next slide, Liz. All right, so the bottom line here is that the data that you put into HMIS is extremely important for a bunch of reasons. We use it to evaluate your programs. HUD uses it to evaluate all of us collectively. About a third of our score in each COC application is based on systems performance. And so that really plays a big part in determining whether or not we're going to get money for new projects. And then we also, hopefully are using this data both at the project level to continue to make your projects better, and then at the systems level to identify gaps and needs and continue to make the system better. So we use the data, for example, to determine what kinds of programs are needed, where they're needed, and who needs them. And so that influences what we're going to fund each year. So for example, do we need new permanent supportive housing for single adults in New Haven, right? That's an example. All right, next slide. So these are some tools that you can use to make sure that your data are correct. There's the data outlier report. That's some information about that is linked here. So that's a tool that'll say, hey, this guy has been in your shelter for 12 years, right? Probably not the case. It's probably just someone that needs to be exited. So that can show you where there are data that are unusual that you likely need to clean up. There's also this new data quality alert dashboard that's built right into HMIS. And this is the tool that I was referencing earlier when we were talking about renewal evaluation. that if you are seeing an outcome in the renewal evaluation database that's different than the outcome that you're seeing in your APR, use this dashboard to try to figure out what data quality cleanup things need to happen in order to get the outcome correct in RED. That's likely, again, a data quality problem. And then finally, the annual progress performance report, the APR, which we talked about earlier. And if you've got questions about any of these things, you can reach out to the team at Nutmeg and they will help you navigate these different resources. All right, next slide. So we know that this is a lot of different data systems and that if you are new to all of this, this can be a little mind-boggling, right? And so we thought it would be helpful, particularly for new staff, to pull together in one place, what are all the different data systems, right? What's the purpose of each data system? And who can help me if I'm stuck and I just can't figure out how to use this data system? So all of that information about each of the data systems that we talked about today is here in one place on this slide, and it is also posted to the CT Boss website. Next slide. All right, so this is our last topic before we invite everyone that is not a SNOFO grantee to hop off, and it is monitoring. So monitoring is basically the process that both HUD and CT Boss use to make sure that you are doing what was intended with the money that you're receiving, and that how you're doing it is aligned with all the requirements that HUD has for how to manage these grants. And so we like to say that monitoring is an open book test, right? If HUD comes out and monitors you, linked here is the HUD monitoring handbook, and that kind of goes through all the things that HUD might look at when they're monitoring. And then also linked here is the CT Boss monitoring guide, and that tells you all the things that we might look for if we come out and monitor you. And the purpose of us monitoring is really to help you. Monitoring is really meant as technical assistance for when we do it, because we want to help find whatever the issues are, so that if HUD comes out and monitors you, you're in really good shape and you don't have to give any money back to them. We also use monitoring to help our team to understand where you guys are struggling and where we need to do more training and more guidance for people. All right, next slide. So HUD uses what's called a risk assessment to decide which grants they're going to monitor, and we're going to look at that in a minute. One of the key differences between HUD monitoring and CT Boss monitoring is that for certain kinds of problems, if HUD finds, for example, that you expended COC funds on something that's not eligible, an ineligible activity, right? They're going to make you pay the money back. So that's why we like to go out and monitor first, so that we can tell you, hey, there's a problem here, and you can fix it before HUD comes out and you don't have to give any money back. If you are a nonprofit recipient or of funds and you've got subrecipients, you are required as the recipient to monitor those subrecipients. So that's important to keep in mind. And if you've got questions about that, reach out and I'm happy to talk more to you about that. Next slide. All right, so these are all of the things that are going to make it more likely that HUD is going to select your program to be monitored, right? So the first one we talked about already, if you submit an APR to HUD that has mistakes in it, or you submit it late, more likely to get monitored. If you are a recipient and you've got multiple subrecipients on your grant, if you've recently had staff turnover and HUD is aware of that staff turnover, if you've got a cumulative grant award, meaning all the money for all your grants that you get combined is more than $2.17 million, it's a very specific number that HUD uses, then you'll be more likely to get monitored. Or if you've got leasing or rental assistance award, and that award is greater than $400,000. Next slide. Other reasons why it will make it more likely that HUD will monitor you if you don't draw down in mocks quarterly. It's that we talked about quite a bit earlier. If they monitored you before and you had some significant findings, they are more likely to come back to make sure that you've corrected them. If you've not been monitored in the past 3 years, that's technically one of their risk analysis things, although I think we know many grants that have been around for a long time and have not been monitored by HUD. So they don't certainly necessarily monitor every grant every 3 years. If they asked you to submit an audit of your financial books and you either didn't submit that audit or you submitted it late or there were a bunch of findings in that audit, that will make it more likely that they monitor you. And finally, if someone calls them to complain about your program, or there's been something in the media that says that there's something not good going on at your program, they will be more likely to come out and monitor you. We're going to skip the next poll because we're running out of time. All right, so this is just a quick, I won't go through all of this, but this is a quick schedule of what happens when in a typical year, in a typical calendar year for the COC. So you can refer to this if you've got questions about when are we going to have to do the project application, or when are we going to get evaluated or monitored. All of that timeline type information is here in this slide. All right, so I want to just see if there are any questions, and then we're gonna just do a couple quick housekeeping things, and then anybody that's not a SNOFO grantee can hop off, and then we've just got a couple more slides that are only relevant if you got a SNOFO Supplemental Notice of Funding Opportunity Award in the 2022 competition. All right, I'm not seeing anything. We'll stay on also at the end for a few minutes. So if anybody has questions, feel free to stay on, and we'll because we are kind of running short on time. All right, so wanted to make sure everybody knows, next slide, Liz, about our annual meeting. So twice a year, we do a semi-annual meeting. All of the steering committee meetings are open to the public, but these meetings, we try to make sure that there's content that isn't just COC business, that's more kind of interesting and getting input from different stakeholders around the state. So this year, we're going to have a presentation by the Department of Labor, and they're going to talk about all their programs that can help folks experiencing homelessness find a job and keep a job, as well as an opportunity for you guys to give some input to DOL on how their programs can be more effective for the people that you serve. So please join us. The meeting information is here. This is you can go on, this is all the contact information for Liz and I and everyone else at Housing Innovations that's on our core CT Boss team. So please, please, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We are always happy to answer your questions. So if you are not a SNOFO grantee, Liz, you can move on to the next slide. You can hop off, and we're just going to talk really quickly about a couple minor things that are a little different for SNOFO projects than for our other projects. So for everyone else, thank you for joining us. It was great to have you, and we look forward to hearing from you soon with any questions that you have. And again, we'll stay on at the end here to answer any questions we didn't get to.
Great.
All right. So in 2022, in addition to the regular NOFO for our COC programs that we use to renew our projects every year, we also had the opportunity to apply for money specifically to address unsheltered and rural homelessness, and we got an $18 million award. So next slide. The good news is for our SNOFO grantees is that for the most part, those grants are going to work. Everything that we just talked about is also going to be applicable for your grant, right? So you don't have to learn a whole new set of data systems. You don't have to learn a whole new set of rules. We don't have to learn a whole new set of data systems and rules. It's all going to work pretty identical to how your existing COC grant works. So that's the good news. The only thing that HUD has said is going to be different about how the SNOFO grants work than the regular grants is that there's going to be a quarterly reporting requirement, right? So usually, we talked about this, you only have to do an APR once a year. For the SNOFO grantees, most of them are going to have to do quarterly reporting. Now, they've said that if you are supportive services only grant, right? So our outreach projects that were funded, those are SSO grants. You are only going to have to report annually. So it's really our PSH programs that were funded under the SNOFO that are going to have to do this quarterly reporting. And you've got to report each fiscal quarter, so January, April, July, and October, beginning with the first quarter after your project begins, and you're going to have 30 days to submit the report. Okay, so next slide. And you are going to do that report as you do with your APR in Sage. And what you're going to have to report, there's going to be some narrative component, they've said, so we don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but the data that you're going to report is going to look, is going to be the same as the data that you have to report regularly in your APR. And so again, linked here is that the template that shows what all of those data are in a more easy to read format than the CSV file. So that's all we know at this point. HUD has said that they're going to do some additional training. They'll do a webinar for SNOFO reporting. They've not announced that webinar yet. When they do announce it, we'll make sure that we get that out to you guys, but that's what we know as of now. All right, so I think that is our last slide. We got in just under the time limit here. We're almost at 11:30, so thank you all for being here. Feel free to hop off and or stay on if you've got questions that we didn't get to answer. Liz and I think we'll stop the recording, but we will answer any questions that you guys have. And it was good to see you all.
Good to see everybody.